Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. I just wanted to say hi and let you know we'll be starting shortly. Yeah, I think we can probably jump in. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. My name's Chrissy Holt. I'm the Marketing Programs Manager here at eCivis, and it is a pleasure to meet you today. Thank you so much for attending. I just wanted to jump in with a few housekeeping notes first before we start our webinar. We will be recording today's webinar. We'll also send the slides via email after the presentation. And if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our presenter for today. This is Kaylee Waterstoff. She is a solutions architect at eCivis. She currently works with new clients and product solutions for grants management. Prior to eCivis, Kaylee was a city grants administrator where she conducted grant research, strategic planning with the departments and funding initiatives, applied for grants funding, monitor grants programs, and helped with the management and compliance of grants for the city. When Kaylee was hired to work for the city, she was asked to implement grants administration, write policy procedures, procure a grants management solution, and work to increase grant portfolio for more competitive opportunities for the city to take pressure off the general fund. So with that, please, Kaylee, take it away.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your afternoon to be here today. So when it comes to grants management, there are those who are experienced in it, maybe through formal training or through just years of experience. And then there are others who are newer to the world of grants. Maybe you were brought in either through managing those COVID relief funds or through other avenues. So to just get a temperature of who's on the call today, we want to take our first polling question. Chrissy's going to initiate that poll, and we just want to know how many years of experience do you have in grants management?
I'll launch that now.
We'll give you about 30 seconds or so to respond, and I think Chrissy can see those come in.
I can. So it looks like we have 20% have about under 1 year, 12% have 1+ years, 16% 2+ years, 16% 5+ years, and 36% of people who are here today have 10+ years of experience.
Great. Thank you, Chrissy. So we have a good majority of people that fall within those 1 to 2 years of experience, but we do have some that have that 10+. So that's really great. Thank you for being here. Super excited to walk through this webinar with you this afternoon. So even if you are a seasoned grants professional, which we have some of those on the call, you understand that grants management is not an easy task. And before we dive into the webinar, I do want to share with you some common challenges that I hear working with clients, and some of the challenges even I had experienced as a former grants administrator. And I'm sure some of you on the call today have encountered some of these challenges that you can see on the screen. And again, these are just general list of the most common challenges shared with us at eCivis, as well as a lot of these challenges were also shared with the most recent Center for Digital Government survey. And they did a survey amongst state and local governments that experience a variety of operational challenges and resource constraints around grants administration. And just to share some of those statistics with you quickly, the CDG found that 35% of their respondents said their organization didn't have a standardized process for grants management. 19% cited that they had significant reporting challenges in finding information. Only 11% of respondents said that they found it currently easy to access a lot of their grant documentation, applications, and things of that sort within their organization. Over 31% of respondents said they currently use disparate systems like Microsoft Excel as their primary grants management software tool. And over 30% said that these processes were either not easy to access or not easy to use at all. So in today's webinar, I want to talk to you all about how you can optimize grants management within your organization with some helpful tips for each major stage of the grant life cycle so that you can avoid or alleviate some of these challenges that you might be experiencing. And I'll also mention ways that you can use government tools like eCivis Grants Network to help with your grants administration and make it more efficient and streamlined. With a strong grants management process, your organization can focus on your most important missions to deliver a greater impact to your community. So today I'm going to break up our discussion into these segments that you're seeing here on the screen. The first two really focus on the pre-award side. And so we're going to talk through ways of identifying grant opportunities, looking for those right fit resources, as well as some strategic planning. The next is the acquisition, so acquiring those grant opportunities. And this falls within some internal policy and procedure conversation, your proposal development, and overall internal preparation and submission of successful grant applications. And then the last three are going to flow into the post-award. So we'll look at ways for implementing that grant award, talk through some different strategies and concepts to consider to make that a smooth process, and then monitoring and closeout stages. How do you successfully monitor your awarded grant opportunities and have a seamless closeout? So the following information in this webinar is intended to provide some insight and guidance into these helpful practices. So if you're really wanting to simplify and develop an effective grants management strategy, some of these things that I mentioned today will take some initiative and some work in the beginning, but once it's established, your grants processes, your communication, and the overall management and oversight will thrive. So the first section I want to discuss is the identification of opportunities. And to start the conversation, for simplifying grants management within your organization, it really starts with establishing internal policy and procedure or internal controls that guide your staff through that successful grants administration from the pre-award, the post-award, and to the closeout processes. So within Uniform Guidance 2 CFR 200, specifically 0.303, the requirement is that non-federal entities receiving any federal funds or awards establish and maintain internal controls designed to reasonably ensure compliance with those federal statutes, regulations, and the terms and conditions of that federal award. So internal controls should be an integral part of the entire cycle of your planning, budgeting, management, and accounting, as well as the monitoring and reporting on your grants. And it should support that effectiveness and integrity every step of the process to provide things like continual feedback, updates, and information to your leadership and management. So if maybe you're in the process of updating your internal controls or creating your internal policy and procedure, consider creating that one if you haven't already, or revising that information so it incorporates and considers that entire grant life cycle. Now, I do have a cheesy saying here, and this is just speaking from experience in trying to establish policy within the city that I had worked for. And this cheesy saying, I'm sure you've heard it, is teamwork makes the dream work. Yes, I know it's super cheesy, but managing grants within your organization is really a team effort because it spans across multiple teams like your finance and accounting, procurement, different departments, and those project leads. So if your dream is really to simplify that grants management process internally, have it seamlessly flow through its entire life cycle, get your team compiled and aware of any internal changes or new processes to your grants administration policy. So let's talk about identifying potential grant opportunities and looking and strategically planning for those. And it really does begin with a need or a project within your organization. And that is designed around planning. And a great way is through a strategic plan. And this can either be through your organization's strategic plans and goals or specific to your department or agency, for example. In order to be competitive to receive funding, it takes some foundational work within your organization. And through the creations of strategic plans, you can really begin to identify those project needs as well as specific funding needs to support those areas of focus. So you might have been a part of a strategic planning session within your organization, or maybe you've reviewed your organization's strategic plan. So the strategic plan is really the blueprint for your organization, and it offers a strong foundation that can be followed as you begin to apply for grants. And strategic plans are really appealing to those grant makers. So there really is a lot of competition for grants right now. And even amongst small local grant makers, for example, they are funding organizations that can improve capacity and sustainability. So your strategic plan really will help you and your organization identify the direction for your future, as well as identify those program areas to address problems and goals. Your strategic plan will also detail how you'll get there, such as how you implement a grant or a program and project internally. It's also an excellent tool to generate support and buy-in. And here again, that teamwork, your internal teamwork to receive those funds. And lastly, it does improve the probabilities of grant success because you can align your request within your grant proposal for funding to your organization's strategic initiatives. And then the last piece here is specifically researching grant opportunities and identifying those grant opportunities that are in alignment with your overall goals and initiatives of your organization. So actively researching potential grant funding sources that can range from your federal opportunities, your state, or even foundational opportunities. And as you're doing that research, maybe it's you who are an individual who does grant research internally, or maybe you have a group of team members who are actively looking for funding. Be sure to read those notices of funding and making sure that within those notices of funding that the grant opportunity aligns with your organization and the specific project. And then just ask yourself as you're reviewing this information, is your organization and the proposed project eligible? Is the range of funding that I'm looking at the amount needed for the project? There's also some other key considerations like the timeline or the amount of time and staff resources it will take to apply and manage the project. And then looking at matching fund requirements, whether there's a cost share of cash or in kind, for example. And then just staying in the know. So watching those funding announcements and listservs and tracking those different opportunities as they become available. So the second section is really starting to create the application, going after those opportunities and ultimately receiving those awards. And so I call this stage the application development phase. And before jumping into the process of filling out an application, there should be some internal steps designed to review and organize the application or proposal development process. And this kind of flows back into earlier with the internal controls that you design and establish within your organization. So there may be a group of individuals who are reviewing a grant application. So that's, again, reading through the notice of funding, they're checking eligibility, the fit of the requirements, things like match, for example. And then ultimately considering if that grant opportunity should be pursued. And so one thing to consider is establishing a formal review and approval. And this can be, maybe you have a group of individuals. So before you begin the application development, it could go through a formal review by your finance department or budget, your project management staff, department heads, and they're reviewing this notice of funding and considering whether or not this is a good funding opportunity to pursue. Upon that approval, so this just follows that formal review, making sure that all of the key stakeholders have had their say in a review of a potential opportunity. And ultimately, upon that approval, the green light is given that your team can begin a successful application development phase. So some tips for the application development. So pay attention to the agency's key interests. And so now we're really going to talk about how a successful application can be created and ultimately you receive that funding. So the key interests of that agency, typically there are keywords sprinkled out through the notice of funding opportunity or the funding organization's mission statement and priorities and goals within their website. Be sure to use some of those terms throughout your proposal, and this will help build that connection between your proposed project and the grantor's goals for awarding funding. Plan your application carefully and allow your team enough time to work on a thoughtful and articulate application. So this, again, is, I don't think anyone wants to write a grant application in 3 days or 24 hours. And maybe some of you on the call have. That's just too much pressure. Giving your team enough time to really create a great articulate application improves your chances of receiving funding. Now, this one I know is super obvious, but sometimes it's not, and it's following instructions. So I'm sure this has been ingrained into you throughout your schooling. You receive a test, for example, and they always tell you, read the instructions before you start answering the questions. So taking that same logic and using that as you begin an application. So follow those instructions. It could be things like word count, key documents that you need to include, just very small things that can impact whether or not you receive this funding. For those competitive applications, it's always extremely beneficial to demonstrate your organization's financial capacity. And so a key tip here is to align your budget in your project narrative and make sure that the project budget is painting a clear picture of that narrative in fiscal terms. And also, if the project will be only partially supported by grant funds, show where the rest of that funding is coming from, whether it's your match or other funding sources. And then lastly, as you begin to collect information, it's always helpful to have some relevant and preliminary data in your applications. So provide enough data to validate your approach and to ensure that the grantor understands that this is a project worth funding. And then just a tip in terms of collecting data as you begin to create more applications within your organization. It's always helpful to have a repository of supporting data so you and your team can use it for other applications. So this can be things like key demographics, population, statistics, things of that sort. And keep it handy. And this saves time for future applications. And then just plan to update that on a regular schedule so that data doesn't become outdated. And then finally, in terms of just your internal process in reviewing a grant application, maybe you establish that it goes through a final review and check. So maybe specific people are reviewing the budget to make sure that it's completed accurately for allowable costs, gather feedback and edits from your team, proofread, spell check, and update the application before officially submitting it to the granting agency. So we're going to take a break, pull you into another poll for poll number 2. So we just want to understand if, or have an idea if your organization does have any formal policies, procedures that outline your grant management procedures. So Chrissy's going to open that poll and we'll get some feedback there.
I'll launch that now. We'll just give it another 30 seconds or so. So your options are yes, no, not yet, but we're working on it. Another couple more seconds. Lovely. Okay, so we've got 46% of you have said yes, so that's awesome. Oh, now to 48% have said yes. 12% have said no, and 38% have said not yet, but we're working on it. So it looks like either many of you have got that in place, or it's something that you're working towards. That's awesome.
Great, thank you. I will mention too at the end of this this presentation, I have some documents that may help those who are working on their policy and procedure. So you'll be able to see that. We're also sending the slide or the entire slide deck to you after the webinar, so you can use those resources as well. So let's transition our focus now into the post-award. And this really begins with the implementation. So you've received your award. Congratulations, this is great, but now the fun begins. And this is where the most work happens with grants administration and managing your specific grants within your organization. And the reason why I wanted to talk and get a poll about internal controls is this is a key piece in the post-award side. So we talked about internal controls and grant policies for managing grants within your organization. And again, 2 CFR 200.303 really refers to those internal controls for managing federal funding that you would receive. So again, just a refresher that internal controls are really key to protecting and safeguarding your grant assets, and they help ensure compliance, reduce risk, fraud, waste, and abuse that can impede the accomplishment of your program. So we'll talk through some tips on the post-award for internal policy and procedure. So one really big one is a formal review and approval of your grant award. So if you don't have this process already, there should be some review of the grant agreement, the terms and conditions, and this just really makes sure that your organization meets all of the conditions for funding, as well as any legal requirements, and making sure that these are reviewed and approved by your organization. A substantial percentage of grant awards do go through some degree of negotiation, whether that be revisions before the award is made, maybe adjustments to the budget, things of that sort. And when a funder decides to support a project, again, it may be a different amount than what you originally requested. So all of this information needs to be reviewed and assessed to make sure that your organization can carry out the terms and conditions of the award. And this does require authorized representative, an approval, and a signature of the contract. If you're a local government, this may go through an approval with your city council, your board of commissioners at the county level. So again, having all of the correct eyes and understanding of that award is important. So upon approval, again, save all of this documentation in a central location that's easily accessible so you can get that data and you can execute that project. So this begins with notifying your grants team and maybe think about launching a kickoff meeting. So together you can devise a timeline that targets all of the compliance reporting deadlines and those benchmarks so that they're in alignment with your program's goals and objectives. So this could look at, scheduling all of those deadlines in a central location, whether that be a shared calendar. And this just keeps everybody in the know so you don't fall out of compliance, you don't miss specific dates and deliverables. And you could even consider scheduling maybe a biweekly or a monthly cadence meeting with your team just to check in and maintain progress on your grant project. And then just make sure that all of those key players are involved, from your finance to procurement, and they're working together to review information such as transactions for specific spending, and again, keeping in alignment with those federal statutes and regulations. And I'm always a big proponent for a central location of information. So this could look like shared folders or a grants management system in which you have a central repository for communication, grant documentation, reminders, team resources, so that everyone can stay up to date on the progress, deliverables, and spending. And then lastly, I always encourage the documentation. So document everything, document. I have my brother-in-law is an auditor, and he makes the joke, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Always save that information so that you have it easily accessible. And this really provides help during the closeout process as well as if you were to be audited, whether that be program specific or a single audit. The next is monitoring. So monitoring your actual program that you have been awarded. And this falls in alignment with Uniform Guidance 2 CFR 200.329. And to better manage and monitor grants, it is important that you have all of that grant awarded information, again, in a central location. And you can see your period of performance, your compliance reporting schedule. The use of a grants management software, for example, can really help your organization streamline that grant tracking effort. So specifically in monitoring, the spending is a huge monitoring task. And this can consist of doing regular reviews of your expenditures to make sure they're charged correctly to follow allowable costs, reviewing those on a consistent basis to make sure that you are in alignment with 2 CFR 200 Part Sub E, so all of those cost principles, and also making sure that your costs are consistent with the project timeline, so that period of performance, and are incurred between the start and stop dates to prevent, a return of funds or paying back funds to the granting agency. And the obvious is just watching the budget so you don't have overspending, and you, again, maintain that good documentation and oversight. The second area is monitoring your performance. So this also falls in line with making sure that all of the reports, so those performance reports, have been submitted to the granting agency. Or if you have any upcoming reporting, perhaps you need to ask for an extension. Just again, having a good temperature check within your program is key to successful performance. And then the natural tracking of your goals and milestones. So this is, again, in alignment with, as you continue through that project, you're documenting any of those milestones and what you've completed, as well as reporting those back to the granting agency. This also helps you analyze if, or even forecast if there will be any delays or issues. And this again goes back to what I had mentioned earlier with maybe you need to ask for an extension. Maybe you're foreseeing or there has been some delays to your project. Communicating that with the granting agency and being aware of those in a timely fashion is key to monitoring your program successfully. The last is our reporting section. So this again falls within monitoring, and you're submitting that reporting to the granting agency. And this just ensures the compliance with the grantor's terms and conditions and stipulations. And it's hugely important as you manage your grant program. So in order to access information necessary to your reporting, it's important to have a standardized collection of all of this data. So the best grants management strategies that an organization can accomplish is that standardization of data collection and reporting processes across the entire organization. And what this does is it has a key area in which you can gather that information, and it helps those program managers or grant managers achieve timely, accurate reporting to comply with the federal grant requirements, while also driving transparency internally within your organization. So schedule all required reporting deadlines so things don't fall through the cracks. That's a tip. So when you receive those terms and conditions, I had mentioned this a little earlier about having a central location, maybe that be a shared calendar with your project team, and schedule those required reporting deadlines at the beginning of the award so that you're aware of those approaching deadlines, and again, so things don't fall through the cracks. And track all of that documentation. So again, I had mentioned too, with document, the reporting is a big key into that compliance. If you were to be audited, one thing, an example I had the other day with a client was requesting prior written approval to avoid subsequent disallowance or disputes on a large cost to their project. And they had to write to the granting agency to get that approval. And that documentation and that approval through the granting agency is just one example of information that is necessary to document. The closeout is the final layer, if you will, through the entire grant life cycle. And this section is really going to follow as you begin to prepare for the closeout, as well as formal processes and tips to successfully carry out the closeout of your grant award. Specifically, uniform guidance, so 2 CFR 200.344 talks about the closeout process, and it begins with the federal awarding agency or the pass-through entity. So they close out the award when it determines that all applicable administrative actions have been completed. And for a smooth closeout within your grant program and all of the great work you were doing during the implementation process, as well as the monitoring, will streamline the closeout for your team. And one tip is to develop a closeout strategy within your organization that maybe goes through formal approvals and reviews before submitting final reporting, for example, ways to route information to your accounting or finance individuals for review and notice of closeout. This may also include conducting a closeout interview with the project lead and other team stakeholders so that all of the necessary information is being reviewed in a timely fashion and you're preparing for those closeout processes. So preparation for closeout should begin I typically hear that it happens within a lot of the clients that I talk to this 3 month prior to the end date of the grant in order to accurately forecast expenses and any adjusting entries that need to be made within the financial management system. Uniform guidance specifically mentions that closeout is a 90-day time frame after the end date of the period of performance for the non-federal entity to submit all final financial and performance reporting. It also is a time where you liquidate all outstanding obligations on the project, unless you had an extension that was authorized by the granting agency, as well as gives you time to review and adjust any cost share obligations, for example. And within that closeout, you're preparing those final reports. So these final reports are closing out the award, and failure to submit these timely and accurately may adversely affect future funding, for example, to your organization, or even other awards that may be pending. So the closeout of your grant can go seamlessly depending on how well the award was managed. So we talked about a lot of those implementation practices, documenting information, monitoring your program. So the closeout will go seamlessly if everything was documented and easily accessible. You had set up all of the closeout requirements for early on in the management of the award. So that kickoff meeting, for example, everything was scheduled and updated in a timely fashion. And then the proper closeout of the award is important to the audit as well. So if you are an agency that has received funding, a non-federal entity that expends $750,000 or more during their fiscal year in federal awards, you may have a single or program-specific audit conducted. So through that implementation and management of your award to the proper closeout will also help with a single audit or a program-specific audit. You may have experience with records retention. Maybe you have specific records retention policy within your organization. If you're a city, local government, each state also has its record retention for specific documentation. And this is another big key piece in maintaining grant awards, specifically with the federal government. And any financial records, those supporting documents for your grant program should be maintained for a period of 3 years from the date of submission and final expenditure report. So some considerations here: if you don't have any records retention policy or information within your current procedural grants administration manual, that's one to consider to make sure that you're following with 2 CFR 200.334 and then any of your states or local records retention policies. So we've talked a lot about centralizing information and managing it in a location where all of your team members can easily access data, have real-time information, and having a centralized system to help your staff or users manage the entire life cycle is really a great tool. And I do want to share a little bit about eCivis Grants Network. It's a software solution that is fully integrated, cloud-based system that propels the full grants management lifecycle. So recipient funding as well as pass-through. So whether you need to research and secure more funding opportunities or track your subrecipients and distribute funding, Grants Network gives you that one place to do it all, and it is 100% compliant with 2 CFR 200, so uniform guidance. Grants Network also acts as a centralized system for all grant activity, grant information, and it helps streamline the administration efficiencies, the necessary data that you need, and project management. So taking all of those best practices and tips for better grants management, and maybe you're thinking about utilizing a grants management system to help you or your staff save time and drive success. If we've learned anything, even just within the last 2 years through the pandemic, grants and that whole process is a lot for any administrative team. Evolving grant details, new opportunities, and shifting reporting requirements can take full-time grant teams weeks to fulfill. And the pandemic only increased this and shed light on this even further. So as a former grants administrator, so Chrissy had mentioned this at the very beginning of our call today, I was hired to establish a better grants management practice within the city, as well as find a useful system to have the necessary oversight into the city's grant funding, from the pre-award all the way to closeout. So I just want to share some general tips that, from my experience, I gathered, and I want to share those with you today. So my first tip for those who are considering a solution, a grants management solution, is to get buy-in from your leadership and the key stakeholders early on in the process. So this could be outlining the cost benefit analysis of procuring a grants management system, such as, this could save X amount of staff time. We could increase our grant portfolio X amount, help manage grants more efficiently, reduce the amount of time that it takes staff to collect data internally. So a lot of the leadership like to see these statistics and this data to get that buy-in. The second is, I had mentioned this really briefly in the first, but the diverse stakeholders. So be sure to really understand the use case and the needs across your organization. So you could be within a nonprofit or a city or other type of government agency. And each of the individuals that have some touch point in grants management have different needs and challenges, right? So if you can bring all of those key stakeholders together and really get a good idea of top concerns, challenges, needs, best practices, and allow that conversation to be open and take into consideration those needs, it's really helpful as you begin to look at different options for a software. I do want to mention to include other parts of your organization, such as finance is a really big one, procurement, for example, and having their perspective is also essential to making informed decisions. And the third big one is really planning for the long term. So establishing maybe a group of people who are a part of your search team. And when it comes to deciding on a grants management system, explore all of the different options, take detailed notes, write out your pros and cons about each of the solutions you looked at that could be a best fit for your current needs and challenges. So you're doing your due diligence up front. You may have to go, if you're more of a local government, to procurement laws, things of that sort. So you may have to go to a competitive bid. But beginning the process and getting a good understand of what is out there really is beneficial in the long term when you're ready to procure a system to help with your grants management. I just wanted to share this tidbit from specifically it's Harris County's Department of Education. And I had shared challenges with you at the beginning. Similarly, Harris County was experiencing similar challenges. It was hard for them to find a lot of data on their grant reporting and to track their success rate in acquiring grants, but also things like knowing what active projects they had and tracking expenses. And specifically, Eric, who's the grants accountant there, or excuse me, grants analyst, they looked at eCivis Grants Network to deploy a centralized grants management solution. and they got all of their key stakeholders together and procured the solution, in which they were able to get a clear oversight and visibility into their funding, so that they could inform their internal staff, leadership, and key stakeholders. So I wanted to leave the last about 15 minutes for if any questions. I'm happy to answer those. You can certainly submit those in the chat. Chrissy will be monitoring those, and I'm happy to answer them. If there are no questions, I do want to share this resources section where I outlined some of the information that can certainly help you with the creation of any internal controls, policy, and procedure that you are currently developing within your organization. Again, we will send these slides out so you can have access to these resources to better support you during that process. So feel free to submit any of those questions. We're happy to answer those. And then we do have one last polling question as well.
So we'll do our poll, and then as we're doing that, if anybody wants to submit, we've got the questions and chat window there if you want to submit any of your questions in there with the next minute or so. So we'd love to know if you'd love to hear more about upcoming webinars. So I'm just going to share that. That's awesome. So yes, if you do have any questions, please do put them in. And if there's anything, that you wanted to ask at a later date, feel, sure to reach out, and we can get someone to answer those questions for you. And lovely. And yeah, we've got 67% of you have voted, and all of you said yes, you'd love to hear more. So that's awesome. Okay. So where are we? I'm looking at the questions in chat here. So somebody did initially ask if you had any more helpful information and resources, but I think you answered that, Kaylee, with your slide.
Yes. Yep.
Is there anything else that you can think to add on there, or is that pretty much most of your resources there?
Yeah, so some other resources, I can certainly send this in a follow-up, but being a part of like the emailing lists, the National Grants Management Association, they have really great webinars as well. And just staying informed with like best practices. That's my encouragement, is getting on those emailing lists and being aware of updates and things of that sort.
Lovely. Okay. So I have a question here. What was the most difficult part of implementing the grants management system that you had, or grants management in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, when I was at the city, the most difficult part was getting all of the key players together and understanding the use case. So I had first, probably to my lack of experience doing that, because this was the first time I've ever had to, was not getting all of the key people involved in the beginning. And so, we kind of did a round two, got everyone together on a monthly basis to talk about grants, even what they're managing within the city, and getting a good understanding of some pain points, frustrations, what would make it better, and then just compiling all of that information over time, so that I was prepared when I was going and meeting with vendors to have like my checklist to make sure that everything was getting checked off, that it's going to meet all of our internal staff's needs. Now, I will say it's not easy to meet everyone's needs, and I'm sure you're aware of that on the call. It's just not possible. But at least meeting about that 80-85%, we understood that some things we would have to do outside of a grants management system, but the system could really streamline other processes. So if you're a people pleaser like me, do know that you can't please everyone, but also giving people their voice and understanding their use case is extremely valuable.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaylee. Just looking to see if we've got any more coming in. Somebody had sort of a question on if you could give a bit more information about what eCivis does.
Yeah, so our system is, so eCivis is really a full lifecycle grants management solution. So if you are looking to research grant opportunities in a central system, looking for funding opportunities to support project needs, and then ultimately manage those, our software provides you as a recipient of funding the pre-award management to post-award and closeout. Our software also supports pass-through. So if you are a grant-making agency or pass-through entity, we do support the sub-recipient management piece from competitive application process and scoring to making those awards, as well as managing all of the compliance reporting that your recipients would report to you. So we're a full life cycle, beginning to end grants management solution.
Thanks, Kaylee. And
I was just saying that was a good question.
Awesome. And there was a bit of a blip there. I didn't know what that was. Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think that's all we had today. So, you know, of course, if you have any other questions, we're going to be sending out a recording and a follow-up email with a recording on there. So if you have any questions, you can always reply to that. And yeah, it's been, thank you so much for attending. And Kaylee, did you want to add anything else?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone's attention. If you do have questions after the webinar, we are happy to answer those. I know sometimes something might pop into your head later. We're always available to answer those questions. And again, appreciate the questions and the group on the call today.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.